Home friends, welcome to the 10th part of the British revenue extortion in Bharat, the case of Tirunelveli district. Now I know I've been, not uploading or posting any videos for at least 3 or 4 months now. So my health was a bit down, but now it's all good. So hopefully I'll be able to upload videos with a more consistent flow from now on. So let's go through the slides. Today is a little bit interesting because we got an interesting character. Okay, so let's go for that. So before we start off, here's a Sanskrit Subhashita, or a good saying. I'll try and pronounce it right. My Sanskrit isn't great. So Yatra Vidvajano Nasti Shilaghas Tatralpadhirapi Nirastapadape Deshe Erandopi Drumayate. What this means is, the first line. So in a place where there are no scholars or learned men or intellectuals, so in a place like that, you even an bluntly put it, even an idiot becomes a scholar. And similarly, in a desert or where there are no trees around, even a castor tree becomes the greatest tree. So the person we have got in question in this video today, he fits this bill exactly, and I'll tell you why. So we are looking at a character called Puckle Durai. So obviously Durai was an kind of epithet or title given by the people of Tirunelveli. His name was Richard K. Puckle, or R. K. Puckle, and he was quite a powerful person because he was made both the collector and the settlement officer for Tirunelveli district in 1866. And from 1866 to 1905, his system of land revenue settlement but kind of took over the district. And 1859 to 1864 was the transitory phase, because we saw in the previous set of slides that the Olungu system was in place, but from 59 to 64 this was junked, and the Rayatwari or the Ryotwari system was brought in place. Now what Puckle did was, and as soon as he came on board, was he introduced a new system. He introduced many innovations. One of them was called the A register and the B register. So the B register is the important one here, because B register was basically a record of the total land held by a farmer. And by total land I mean both the cultivated and the non-cultivated land. But what Puckle did was, the farmer was taxed on the total amount of land he held, not just on the cultivated part. So if you had 10 acres and you were cultivating say 5 acres, and 5 acres were wasteland or for grazing, you would be taxed on the 10 acres, not just that 5-acre part which was cultivated. And Puckle gave people a choice: you either pay up or you let go of the land. So India being Bharat, so people are very attached to their land, especially farmers, and they see land as Bhudevi, or the earth goddess. So many farmers paid up rather than let their land go, and almost 250,000 acres were retained in this way. But obviously lakhs of acres were abandoned because farmers simply didn't have any resources. And by this time you had this massive influx of out of work artisans, craftsmen, who became subsistence level farmers, farming micro plots. So it was basically very kind of unviable occupation. And now R.K. Puckle, or Puckle Durai, was a typical your Abrahamic Christian British collector. And one of the things he did was he abolished something known as a Chaturbhagam. So Chaturbhagam was an exemption traditionally given to Brahmins, by different rulers of the land prior to the British, and even during British time. So R.K. Puckle was the first person to abolish it in the Tirunelveli district, because he said that it was unnecessary expense. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide. And we kind of keep boasting about becoming the Vishwa Guru, and I don't know what guru and this guru and that guru, but this is the reality of our country. And I kind of showed you another example from Andhra Pradesh, where I think Arthur Cotton was the British official who was kind of who has been almost turned into some kind of a demigod. And this is a snapshot of a tweet from the collector and district magistrate Tuticorin. The hashtag is Pride, Passion, Purpose. and it says tribute to the memory of an instrumental work done in 1874 by Sri R.K. Puckle, the then collector of Tirunelveli. His metamorphic work, now I have no idea what metamorphic means. If you know, please put it in the comments, of bringing Thamirabharani water, so that's Tamrabarni, to Kulayan Karasal village transformed the agriculture and livelihood pattern of people. Now, there's a very interesting quote about R.K. Puckle. So, you also need to watch my video on forced labor in British India to understand how these things, especially the public works, canals, tanks, bridges, were built by the British in India. So, the Gazetteer of 1917 says that, I'm looking at my notes because I've got a very poor memory. Mr. Puckle adopted the policy of enlisting cooperation of people in executing at their own cost works of public utility. So what this basically means is the people were paying taxes to their nose, so land revenue and a lot of other taxes, but the British government didn't want to spend any money on public works because everything had to be sent, to London. So Puckle Durai got the people organized and he convinced them to contribute to building the canals and whatever waterworks were needed. So essentially, people were paying a tax, but they were also paying to get something done that the government should have done in the first place. Okay, so that's so which is why I say we are very mentally colonized, and I think this little girl here, she is holding a picture. I don't know if it's of Puckle Durai or not. Because I tried searching online for his photos, but I couldn't find anything. But I guess they got something from the archives. Okay, so Puckle did a few things, and now, as I said, he's one of the longest serving collectors of that district. So first he divided Tirunelveli district based on its geography. Okay, now we saw in the first set of slides that Tirunelveli has got really barren, almost semi-desert areas, very fertile, black cotton soil kind of areas, and there are dry parts watered by the Tamraparni river. So Puckle divided Tirunelveli district into 4 geographical divisions. One was Neerarambam. Okay, so I don't know Tamil, so again pronunciation will be off. So Neerarambam, so these are lands watered by the Tamraparni river. Kadarambam, so the part which is not watered by any river. So it might have a well, it might have a tank, it might be fed by rainwater, but it doesn't have a direct access to flowing river water. So Palmyra forest, so these are all the coastal belt of mostly semi-desert barren sand dunes, but even these were considered to be capable of giving some kind of revenue. And finally the very fertile belt of black cotton soil. So he didn't stop here, so he went much further, and we'll talk about that in the next slide. So he went further, and this was also the British obsession with categorizing and classifying every last thing. So like I said, they always had this feeling that they were missing out on some hidden source of revenue, and they had to unlock that source. So they kept classifying, kept categorizing, breaking everything down just to kind of get at that hidden source of money. So he divided the soil into 5 classes. So after dividing Tirunelveli district into 4 geographical divisions, he then divided the soil into 5 classes. So he classed it as best, so very fertile, good, ordinary, average, inferior, and absolutely the worst. So the worst and inferior were really your semi-desert kind of soils. And again, looking at my notes, so he divided the soil types further into 7 classes, which were known as tarams. Okay. So what was a taram? So taram was a basically classification which could have different soil types. So each taram could have different soil type. So for example, you could have one taram with very good black soil, which was known as black loam, and you would have another soil type of equivalent fertility or productivity, which could be your red soil, so which was known as red loam. So it starts to become a very confusing, convoluted mess now. And again, each taram had 2 sets of rates, one for a land which was giving 1 crop a year and another for land which was giving 2 crops a year. Okay, so you had 14 tarams in all, and then they added 2 more tarams, so 2 more classifications. But what the problem this led to was it led to this, like I said, tangled web of categories and subcategories, and the local officials, typically as happens in India, arbitrarily applied, as per their perception or understanding on the ground. So a village could have really good soil but really poor sources of water. So no river, no rains, maybe brackish well water. On the other hand, a village could have really good sources of water but very poor quality soil. So maybe almost semi-desert. So the way the taxes were applied, land revenue was extracted, was very uneven. So some villages got off very lucky, and some villages were, absolutely got the kind of the bad end of the stick. Okay, so that was that. Yep, so that was, Puckle's kind of system, and we'll have a look at an interesting calculation. So again, everything had to have pretense of being calculated mathematically. So what Puckle did was he devised a system of 3 steps of how you would arrive at the land revenue payable by a farmer. So the first step was to estimate an average yield per acre. Okay, now I have mentioned this many times and I also covered this in the last set of slides. There was this thing called average yield per acre, which was nothing more than a guesstimate. And then there was another thing called the average market rate, again a guesstimate. And they multiplied these two to get the average value of produce. Okay, and based on the average value of produce, you would subtract the cost of cultivation per acre. So there's a typo there, so it says cost of cultivation per care. It should be acre. So you subtract that cost of cultivation, and again in this cost of cultivation, a lot of things were simply not considered. So this is again a very arbitrary amount. You divide it by 2 and you would get the residual earnings. So what was really left with the farmer? And in the last step, you would subtract, you take off 5% from the residual earnings, and that would give you land revenue payable. So you can see all of this was extremely arbitrary, and how this was arrived at was anybody's guess. Okay, so let's look at some graphs and charts. So this is long period from 1860 to 1905, but we should really take, Puckle Durai's period to be from 1866 onwards to 1905. Now 1806, you can see there's a big kind of pulse, and then the net income kind of drops and it kind of fluctuates, but it usually stays between around 3 rupees to 7 rupees. That's the average earnings over a 35-year period. So earnings kind of went up a bit, but you have to remember this has to be adjusted for inflation and so on. And by this time, prices of everything had gone up as well. So this was not 1800s where 1 rupee could get you a lot of things. So prices of everything had gone up, the input costs had gone up, the marketing costs had gone up. So in real terms, this doesn't really amount to much, even though it looks like, oh my god, they're earning 3 rupees to 8 rupees per acre. Okay, and the next amount of grain left with the farmer as percentage of average yield per acre. So that has gone up as well. Again, because of some of the things that R.K. Puckle did. So he also rationalized some things. So the net amount of grain, from being in negative, the farmer actually has around, on an average from 1866 to 1905. So if we take this as a benchmark, so between 10% to 25%. So it kind of fluctuates. But for the later part of the period, it kind of stays within the 20 to 25% range. So all that has gone up, but again you have to remember by this time, a lot of people were really doing subsistence level agriculture, so micro plots of under an acre. So situation on the ground was very grim. This was reflected in the millions of people dying in southern India during the famines. And finally, so how much percentage yield was actually given up as land revenue? Okay, so that falls down considerably, leaving aside the pulse brought about by the transition period from 1860 to 66. You can see it pretty much kind of stays between 5% to roughly 14%. It's actually stayed in 5% to 10% for most of that. So things were rationalized, but by this point it was too late, and the British applied extractions on the other ends as well. Okay, friends, so this was Puckle Durai. Now in the next set of slides, we'll talk about the last phase, which was 1905 to 1947, and it won't be a very big set of slides, but I'll also include the concept of the yield per acre and why it's a very kind of illusory kind of thing. So we'll have two more parts for this, so maybe part 11 and 12. So in the 12th part it will be a freewheeling one. Well, I'll take you through this Excel spreadsheet I've got where I analyze the data and where I created those graphs and charts, and I'll also talk you through the logic of how I did things, why I did them, and from the sources where I got the data. Okay friends, so this is all for this time. Like I said, I'll try to be more consistent in posting videos. So thank you for watching, and you have a good day or a good night. Hari Om.